So what else do you do interviews on?
Oh, many years ago, I was an actor, so I did quite a lot of on-screen
stuff. Are we
stuff.
recording?
We're recording.
We are recording.
Yeah.
You were what?
I was an actor.
Yeah?
Yeah. Like on TV commercials, a little bit of soap opera locally in New Zealand, and
get YouTube up now. Can we find you?
Possibly.
Would that
one of them got
embarrass you?
taken down for copyright reasons because they had the copyright for "Believe It or Not, I'm Working on Air," and they could only do it for a year, and they had to take it down because of copyright infringements.
Are we going to embarrass you now? Do you mind
I'm
us?
not embarrassed by it.
What would you have been in?
Yeah, how do we find you?
TV commercials would be the one, but I'm not sure if it's even up there anymore. But there was a New Zealand Lotto commercial where I got stopped in shopping malls for about a year because I did this crazy dancing stuff. And
I think.
What?
yeah.
Did you know this?
Is this you? No, I didn't.
I wanted to be an actor when I was in my 20s.
Is this it?
Oh, that's me doing a film review thing.
Okay.
You look so different.
I do look different. Well, I was a lot younger then.
So
You look kind of Hollywood.
So we need a TV commercial.
There it is. That's me.
Oh my God, look at it. Can you turn it up, Danny?
Look at what's happened to me. I can't believe it myself. Suddenly I'm up on top of the world. It should have been somebody else. Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I'd
Oh my God.
flying away on a wing and a prayer. Who could it be? Believe it or not, it's just me. Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so free.
That is absolutely amazing.
And that is me singing too.
That is amazing. So was that like your entire career or was it a side gig?
That was a side gig. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to make it as an actor, but I never quite had the voice for it. So I ended up doing these little funny, quirky, dancey physical comedy numbers as a side gig instead.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
So, but you did say you did some TV drama.
I did some TV drama, little walk-on parts, Hercules, Legendary Journeys, and local Kiwi soap opera walk-on part, a bit of theatre.
What theatre did you do?
Oh, just local stuff in New Zealand.
Yeah?
Mainly improvised stuff or avant-garde theatre.
And you don't do any like at all anymore?
Last one I did was about 12 years ago. And now these days no.
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 Oh my God. That's one of the biggest surprise intros to a show. Didn't see that one coming.
No, it was all because you asked, have you done this before? And I was thinking, how do I answer this?
What was
Yes and
that?
no.
What was that other thing? Did you have your own like YouTube channel reviewing films?
No, that was just some training that I did and learning how to be a presenter in case I ever wanted to be. I decided I didn't, but part of the training was we had to do film reviews.
So when did you give up on Hollywood?
I think about, when was I? I'd given up on it just before I got that big commercial, actually. And that's often the way. You give up, and I'd called my agent and said, look, I'm really happy with what I'm doing. I'm loving my career, and auditions were taking a bit of time. And I said, look, thanks for everything you've done. And then she rang up about a month later and said, there's just one more. And I was like, no. And she rang back 30 minutes later and said, what if we allowed you to audition without doing an audition? I said, how does that work? And she said, well, they've got some footage of you from a year ago when you did this quirky dancing stuff, and they quite like it, and they want you to throw it in there. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. It's a completely different ad. But yeah, sure, why not? If you can win a lottery without buying a ticket, that's always a good gig. So yeah, that's a winning trade. So there's no downside. So I said, yeah, sure. And then she rang me back the next day and said, you're not going to believe it. You've got the part. And I never even auditioned for it, but I had exactly the quirky moves they just happened to be looking for. And so I got the part.
Was it a 1 day shoot?
It was a 3-day shoot.
3-day shoot?
3 days.
And rehearsals?
Yep, lots of rehearsals, lots of dance choreography. They had all these people from the Royal New Zealand Ballet who'd been like, proper dancers. I've never learned how to dance clearly in my life.
But it works brilliantly.
It works brilliantly, yeah. And the gig was, and I was a bit nervous because I'm like, God, these people actually know how to dance. And, they've been training for 3 years how to dance properly. And now they've got to follow that guy. But they were really great about it. And we had a lot of fun. And it was, I would have done it for free. I didn't tell them that, but it was just so much fun.
And that didn't become your then big break?
No, that was like, I got a bit of work after that.
Yeah.
And I did another show on the back of that, like a theatre show where I did some dancing as well. But my life was just going in a different direction.
It's so funny when you find out these like weird things that people have done in their life differently or have in their background. Very. What were you doing at the time though?
So let's see, when I did that commercial, I just stepped down from running a technology company that I'd founded and I'd moved into doing coaching of technology entrepreneurs, which I still do today.
So where's Bitcoin come into all this?
Complete accident, basically from knowing Willie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you're looking forward to seeing him then?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is he here now? Has he got here?
I think he will be here now, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Tell me how you got into Bitcoin. Why did it click with you?
Well, it didn't to start with. He was talking about it way back in 2015, and I thought, I can't see how this is going to change the world like a lot of people. And then a few years later, he contacted me again. We were just chatting about some other stuff, and he said, oh, by the way, you should look into it. It's about to rip. And that was in 2020. And I thought, okay, I'll listen to you this time. I didn't last time, and that didn't work out so well. So I'll learn from my mistakes. And we just kept on chatting a bit, and then we came back into each other's world. And he was pretty instrumental in just encouraging me to do more research into the whole Bitcoin and energy side. Because I was interested in it from two angles. I was interested in it because Will was schooling me in it at that stage, but also because I was running a ClimateTech fund. And we were starting to ask questions about how much impact we were having. And we came to the conclusion it was really not that much. And at the same time, some people were saying, well, Bitcoin's actually something you could invest in as a climate tech. And I was like, I don't think so, based on the mainstream media narratives I'd read at the time. But Willie encouraged me to look into it a bit deeper. And actually, one of the guys who we'd invested in, I found out he was a Bitcoiner. And I knew his environmental credentials for like about 4 years. He had changed his whole career path to start up this incredible technology where they created this machine where you can make greenhouses carbon neutral by taking them off natural gas and replacing them with a clean burner, which sends clean CO2 into greenhouses. They use slash from the forestry industry, so it's part of the natural carbon cycle, and it gets you off your natural gas pipeline. And so I knew his environmental credentials, and we were chatting, and I was saying, I'm interested in Bitcoin, but I'm not really impressed about its environmental track record. And he questioned that, and he said, well, I'm not going to try and do a Serbian accent, but he said, look, I encourage you to dig deeper. And I did dig deeper. And that was like a moment where I was like, I thought you could either be an environmentalist or a Bitcoin proponent, but here's someone who's both. And so that kind of scrambled my brain a little bit and encouraged me to dig deeper. And at the same time, I was starting to question, what other technologies could we invest in? So I just asked the question, well, could this actually be net positive or is it net negative? So I really went in very neutral, possibly slightly negative or skeptical, but I just took about 6 weeks out just to do pure research and put everything that was a preconception to one side and just looked at the numbers, and I like to look at the numbers, and came with the conclusion that, this is actually, sure, it has a carbon footprint, but so does every technology I ever invest in initially. And you always invest with the idea. You don't indict a technology because it has a negative imprint at a point in time. If you'd done that, you would have banned solar back in the 1990s. You have to look at its trajectory over the entire life cycle. And when you looked at Bitcoin mining over a life cycle, I came to the conclusion it was going to be net positive. There was no question that it had that potential.
What is clean CO2?
Clean CO2. Oh, so in that case, the stuff that goes into the greenhouses?
Yeah.
You mean? Yeah, well, if you're going to...
Is it dirty CO2 and clean CO2? I mean, I thought CO2 is just CO2.
Well, if you're going to put things into greenhouses where people are and plants are, it's very important you take out all the noxious compounds. So if you're burning wood chips, you have to have a really good technology to remove all the impurities. Otherwise, people can die. So he had designed a system where you could burn wood chips, you could purify it, and send CO2, which had none of the additional noxious compounds in there. So it was safe for humans, safe for plants.
Interesting. Okay, so the Clean Tech Fund was one you were working for, or you started? You started on your own, or was there a group of you?
With a couple of partners.
Okay.
Yeah.
The idea being?
Well, the idea being I'd been investing in technology companies for, at that point, 15 years.
Yeah.
And I wanted to invest in companies that had more impact. I've been an environmentalist for many decades. And so I wanted to bring those two worlds together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know this is going to sound like a dumb question, but what does it mean to be an environmentalist?
Well, in my case...
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, that's right. It never really occurred to me not to be, because my whole family were. So it was right from when I was 4 years old. Where I was born was in the West Coast. Actually, where I was born was in England, but where I spent my childhood was in the West Coast of a little rural community just outside Auckland in New Zealand. And when I was 4 years old, there was a landfill that was proposed in that area, and the community got up in arms about it all. And I remember that time, even as a 4-year-old, because it was a story about the community coming together and winning against a bigger oppressive power that was trying to impose an agenda without consulting the local community. And so there's a picture of me in a magazine, age 4, with a little sign saying, "Don't trash the Waitakaris," which is the area I was from.
So you were the first Greta.
I was 4.
Yeah.
I was 4.
Fucking hell, Greta, 16.
Yeah.
Come on.
And then at age 10, I was on anti-apartheid marches with my mum's permission. And then at age 11, I was on an Indigenous land rights march. And then throughout my teenage and 20s, I was on different, anti-GE marches and climate change marches later on, protesting against deep sea oil drilling, writing letters to the editor in magazines and newspapers, trying to raise people's attention about climate change in the business community in the early and mid 2000s. So it's always been something I've done. And my role models around me, they were people who took direct action. My 2 close childhood friends, one of them's in Greenpeace, Aotearoa, New Zealand. The other one's in the Green Party and is probably going to be elected into Parliament this year. So they're my peers, my community.
And so as an environmentalist, right now, what would be your primary concerns?
Right now?
Right now,
Methane emissions.
Methane emissions. Yeah. Ahead of carbon emissions? Are carbon emissions a concern of yours?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, these are loaded questions because in the world of Bitcoin, we have quite a lot of debates, discussions regarding climate change, what is real, what isn't. And it's a spectrum from people on one side completely dismissing it's even happening or claiming that climate change is natural cycles, yada, yada. To those who would maybe fall into the Epstein camp who admit that the climate is changing, but maybe will say, well, we need to burn fossil fuels. Humans flourish with burning fossil fuels. That the best thing we can do to mitigate climate change is burn more fossil fuels so we can have the technologies to for mitigation. He argues succinctly and strongly. We have groups of people who admit it's happening but think there's nothing we can do about it. And what's the point saying someone like the UK trying to do anything when we contribute something like 1% of global emissions and China's not making any difference? To people all the way the other end let's start saying someone like me who believes it's an issue, we're causing it, but I'm a massive fucking hypocrite because I fly around the world and drive a car and have done nothing, or done very little. To the what I would say the people who are kind of like the crazy environmentalists who don't seem to have rational alternatives to ending things like oil. So there's this huge spectrum. And me as somebody who does a job like this, who wants to understand everyone's position, therefore gets completely lost. I find it hard to hold one position because I'm like, well, apart from the people who complete denialists, they're fuck them. But Epstein, I'm like, you make really good arguments. And the people over here are like, yeah, no, we're going to destroy the planet and we're all going to die. It's like, you make some really good arguments. So I get completely lost. Where do you fit in all of this?
So where I fit is, in my mind, there's no question that climate change is happening, that it's caused by humans. and that it's urgent that we address it. It's not only carbon dioxide emissions, but it's also methane and other gases which cause global warming. And my response to that is, well, I can reduce my carbon footprint, but that's only going to cause so much good. So how can I use my time on this planet and the little bit that I know to make a difference beyond my own carbon footprint? So I'm a pragmatist.
Why do we have difficulty convincing people that climate change is real and is caused by humans? Why is there such strong arguments against it?
Mm-hmm.
Surely scientifically this should be easy to prove.
Yeah, scientifically there's some great arguments right back to Carl Sagan enunciating it very well decades ago. I've pulled up some old footage of Margaret Thatcher back in the 1990s when she was staunchly acknowledging the pressing need to address climate change early and urgently in the 1990s. So there was actually a time in history, recent history, where it was increasingly widely acknowledged across the political spectrum. And what seems to have happened since then is that certain vested interests have done a very good job of creating FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So the same tactics that opponents may use of Bitcoin have been used to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the legitimacy of climate change.
There was that book, the guy we had on the show, The Decade We Could Have Saved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nathaniel Rich?
Nathaniel Rich wrote a book. Can you dig up the name of his book? He does a really good work. He's done like a range of things. He even did the research into the Canadian exchange, didn't he?
Quadriga,
did he do the article about... There's that film... Oh, God, why my memory always throws me? There's this really great film... Dark Waters? Is it Dark Waters?
That was the one. Yeah, I don't know. Was that him?
I think he wrote the article that led to that film. That was to do with one of the I think it's oil firms were leaking oil into the... God, I can't remember the details. But anyway.
Yeah, he wrote something called The Lawyer Who Became DuPont's Worst Nightmare, which was part
DuPont's, that's it, yeah. Yeah, no, DuPont, the chemicals were leaking into the soil. The cows were dying. The local people were getting cancer. He wrote the article that became the film.
Right.
And he wrote a book, Losing Earth, a Decade We Almost Stopped Climate Change. I'm pretty sure this book is about ExxonMobil. Yeah. Their scientists said and knew climate change was happening. Mm-hmm. They knew it was because of increases in carbon in the atmosphere. Correct. And they knew it was humans causing it. Yep. They knew all of this. They're in-house scientists. Mm-hmm. And then I'm pretty sure it was the Bush administration, and it just something happened during that period whereby when the focus changed from let's do something about it to PR campaigns. It's like the same as big tobacco and everyone did to just destroy it.
Yeah. That's pretty much the story.
But even so that's happened, I still, if the scientific evidence is there, if it can be proven, why do we still struggle to convince some people? I just don't understand it. Because I've read through the evidence.
It was interesting. I was chatting to Brad Mills actually the other day, and he gave me an insight into it. And he said, look, see, what happens is once you've been lied to once by the government, or maybe twice, you start to disbelieve everything they say. And so he said, look, I'm kind of libertarian. I don't believe anything the state tells me. So if they tell me that climate change is an issue, I'm just not going to believe them because it's the state and I don't believe the state. He said, however, if you tell me, you're a guy who believes in sound money. If you tell me, Daniel, that we have methane emission problems, I'm going to say, really? Let me look at that. So it's less about the science and more about whether the person telling you trust. And because we've lost so much trust in government, some would say with very good reason, unfortunately, we're not going to trust them. Or a lot of people aren't going to trust them when they hear, look, climate change is real. And people say, no, it's all a big scam. It's all a big hoax. I'm sick of being lied to. This is just another lie. I can totally understand why people would form that reaction.
Another tool of control.
Yeah, it's another tool of control.
Taxation.
Yeah, it's just for to create fear so that they can impose an agenda on us. And look, those tactics have been used in other areas, so it's natural people would be suspicious and think that climate change is just another example of that. So I totally get why people would suspect that it's a hoax.
There is a geographic point to this. So
totally.
I don't know what it's like here in Australia, what it's like in New Zealand.
It's not a debate we have.
We don't have it in the UK.
We don't have the debate at all.
There are a few
It's
people
only in the States
Yeah.
and one or two other countries.
There are a few people trying to
Yeah.
have it, and they tend to be the people who show strong alignment with like American conservatism. I could name them, the people on Twitter I follow in the UK who fall into that camp. But there is no debate in the UK.
There's no debate.
There is debate over what should be done and could be done. Konstantin Kisin, who was on my show recently, has put up some very strong arguments that we in the UK, our net zero targets are close to impossible and will make almost no difference to global emissions. So it isn't worth it. What we should be doing is therefore investing in technology solutions for mitigation. And I think it was the Oxford Union where he did this. Have you ever seen his?
I haven't.
Is it
very
long?
good.
Is it too long to show now?
It's too long. It's a good 5 minutes, but it's really good.
Yeah, it's well worth watching. We'll share
We'll put
with
it in
you.
the show notes.
Yeah. But it isn't a debate in the UK. Everyone is aligned and understands there is an issue. They're not aligned on the solutions. Just Stop Oil are pissing everybody off. Everyone hates them. People want to run them over when they block the roads.
Yeah.
They disturb. Look, I admire any protest, by the way. So, like, right to protest, and you cannot deny they've been effective.
Yeah.
They've just not won hearts and minds. Come to the US, and it might be because of the community I mix in with Bitcoin is slightly different, but come to the US, the debate seems a lot bigger.
Yeah, I think it is a lot bigger. There's a lot of people who just don't believe it's happening in the US, and that's not representative of Europe or Australia or New Zealand, certainly.
Okay, firstly, so there will be people listening who are going to be like, fuck off, Pete, fuck off, Daniel, climate change isn't real, blah, blah, blah. How would you appeal to them? What would you say to them?
The first thing I'd say is I can completely understand why they've come to that conclusion, honestly.
Yeah.
Just in the same way that I can completely understand why an environmentalist has come to the conclusion that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. Because in both cases, you trust certain sources who are in your tribe.
Yeah.
And this is just the way that humans are designed. Maybe in some other planet's different and we listen to rationality much more, but we tend to listen to people we know, like, and trust. And so environmentalists will listen to other environmentalists and people in Greenpeace USA and Sierra Club. And if they're all saying Bitcoin's bad, then you're soaking in that environment. You'll take on the viewpoint of that tribe. And if you're mixing with people who all the time are saying climate change is a hoax, don't trust the state, then you can understand why you come to that viewpoint. And all I'd say is, look, I totally understand that. If you're interested in having your viewpoint changed, I'm happy to have a discussion with you, but I'm not interested in a debate.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one as well, because I've noticed, like, Epstein, for example, has tried to get people to debate him. I've a kind of relationship with someone called Catherine Hayhoe. She's been on the podcast, and we discuss things. And I've asked her about these debates, and she said, "I'm not debating people who I fundamentally know are wrong. It is a waste of my time. It's not happening." But I find Epstein an interesting character because he accepts climate change as real. He knows that's a dumb argument. So his argument is that let's not have that debate. The debate should be what we should do about it. And his belief is we should continue to burn oil. We should be encouraging and making oil available to the poorest communities in the world, because energy leads to prosperity, and innovation will lead to mitigation. I have a lot of sympathy for that argument, mainly because I think humans are trash as a group, and we won't solve the problem. So even if everyone agreed, doesn't matter. It's like everyone in this room, everyone in Europe, Australasia, America all agreed climate change is real. I don't think we have the will to make the changes to stop it.
Yeah, it's real tough. It really is tough. And the reality is that some of the ways that we've gone about trying to address climate change have not worked that well. If you look at a whole lot of stranded energy, solar and wind development, which is in parts of the world without any consideration about building out the grid or about balancing that intermittency, there's been some big mistakes that have been made. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing something about it, or we couldn't nuance that and take those considerations into play. But we've made some mistakes. So I guess part of what I've looked to do is said, well, that's a big challenge to solve. Where's some low-hanging fruit? And for me, with my technology hat, when you're a technology entrepreneur, you're always looking for the shortcuts. Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where's the thing that's easy or relatively easy to solve, where I can make an impact? Where's the area which I have some knowledge about? It turned out I didn't have very much knowledge. I had to go and learn it or get some people on the team who did have some knowledge. But it was all methane. And that was the area that I found that while everyone was debating carbon dioxide, and there's no question we need to mitigate that as well in my mind, and that's why we are investing in companies who do mitigate carbon dioxide, but there was a much more pressing concern, and that was our methane levels, which were rising parabolically. And only 2 cents in every ClimateTech dollar was going into methane mitigation. The other 98 was going to carbon dioxide, but methane mitigation is the one that's, according to the UN, that's our biggest hope to actually reduce climate change in our generation.
All right, I definitely want to come back to methane, but I didn't want to pass on because you mentioned Greenpeace.
Yeah.
Really interesting in that I've lost all respect for Greenpeace over the last year or so.
Well, I got to make a nuance. It's Greenpeace USA who are running that campaign.
Fine.
Yeah, but I understand what you're saying.
I mean, I don't know the politics or the organizational structure globally. I used to be a donor to Greenpeace, in my 20s. I don't even know why I stopped. But anyway, I was a donor to Greenpeace, always respected everything they did. And then the propaganda campaign they've run against Bitcoin, which is a paid propaganda campaign, which is based entirely on lies, whereby either they are knowingly lying to accept money or they're refusing to do the proper research to understand if they're disseminating truth or facts, makes me completely distrust them as an organization now. And it's a bit like you said, once you've been lied to once, it's the same that's happened with the government, our UK government during COVID. Now we know we were fundamentally lied to. It's the same with the media, the corporate media in the UK, certainly the US, where we know we've been lied to. It was like Eric Weinstein just did this interview with Chris Williamson, and he was talking about we're in a post-truth world now, and nobody knows what the fuck anymore, how to find the truth.
Exactly.
And that people are choosing a side on any issue and sticking with it rather than like searching for the truth. So I've lost all trust in Greenpeace because of this. It's such a weird thing for them to do.
Yeah, it seems like the latter rather than the former. I think they genuinely believe, from what I can make out, that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. I can understand why they believe that because of the other people who whisper in their ear and tell them that and reinforce that message. But my criticism is, just as you say, that they haven't backed up the truck and actually done the research. They just haven't. And it's been out there, and it's coming out there in increasing regularity now, but the message is still the same.
There has been a shift in narrative.
There has been a shift. There really has.
Yeah,
this year. In the last few months, actually.
It's fascinating. Like mainstream news sources. I mean, I certainly seen Forbes do it. Who else has done it? We've seen a few, haven't we?
Sort of backtrack.
No, almost like just more positive news stories about.
KPMG wrote a piece that was pretty based.
Financial Times, You Today. There's been a number who are doing it more consistently now.
Even
Bloomberg, they had an article, and it blew me away because they had a do not publish anything positive about Bitcoin policy. And
I didn't know they had that.
So,
motherfuckers.
So, we know this because one of the journalists for Cointelegraph used to work at Bloomberg, and he tried to get positive articles on Bitcoin published, and he was basically told by his editors, we will not publish anything positive about Bitcoin. So they've changed as well.
Do people know what journalism is? It's crazy. But yeah, I've noticed this shift, and I wonder, is this just people getting wise to it? They're seeing the good arguments, the solid arguments.
I'll tell you what it is.
Or is it BlackRock?
No, it's not BlackRock. A lot of people have said that. It's not BlackRock because there's three big things that have happened. Cambridge have revised their reports downwards about Bitcoin's energy consumption. KPM's given it the tick for ESG. BlackRock's published a video which is mildly positive about Bitcoin. The first ever academic journal has come out which was positive about Bitcoin. MIT is publishing a working paper which had a balanced look. They looked at the negative and the positive externalities. First time ever. Now, this work started before the BlackRock ETF came on board. So people are looking at it and saying it's all because of BlackRock. It's not. It was starting anyway. And
that just helps.
It definitely helps. And it's important because there are a number of people like Troy Cross, people like Dennis Porter, who are working tirelessly, and a whole number of other people in the background who are helping to do the work that leads to these transformations by talking to people, by bringing them on side, and they're working tirelessly and doing amazing work. And it's actually because of other people in the Bitcoin community who are making the effort to reach out that we're starting to see that narrative shift. Troy has been amazing.
Yeah, we love
just
Troy.
incredible.
But let's also, sorry, just interrupt. Let's also give a solid shout out at the same time to Dennis Porter, because Dennis Porter came into the Bitcoin scene like a train, and did a bunch of things, and he's just suddenly found his space, and his work recently has been utterly fantastic, and I think he deserves big credit for everything he's done.
Huge credit. And it's resulted in a shift in the media. It's resulted in a shift with politicians. And look at how many presidential candidates now are coming out and declaring their Bitcoin colors. So the work that these people...
But hold on.
Well, I know there's a vested interest,
it's the Bitcoin voting block, and let's not trust these ones.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Still, you need people like Dennis Porter who shows that it is an election-worthy issue for people to even make that call.
So what was the first one? Was Cambridge the trigger, the first one that triggered the rest?
Cambridge have been quite good for a while, haven't they?
They've been pretty good. I'm in touch with the people there. I mean, look, they're a good, reputable institution. The only issue is they're resource constrained. Right. And so their data is accurate to a point, but it's got out of date.
Did Cambridge originally, I'm just talking a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, say eventually Bitcoin will use all the energy in the world?
That wasn't Cambridge.
That wasn't Cambridge. No. Were they the ones who then wrote the article that countered that?
That wasn't Cambridge either. So Cambridge have always been kind of in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was a paper by Mora et al. That said that it's going to boil the oceans, and
didn't that have...
they cited Alex de Vries.
Yeah, Alex de Vries, who's
he's kind of behind
shit.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's full of shit.
I think it was Digiconomist that wrote that.
Was it Digiconomist?
I think so.
Yeah, there was some stuff from the World Economic Forum as well. But Cambridge, they were saying all along, no, it's about 32% sustainable energy.
Yeah.
And that was actually true before the China ban, it was. But what's happened since then is the world's totally changed. Totally changed. But their mining map and their data is still almost 2 years old. That's
really?
That's the issue.
But what are they saying at the moment, even with it 2 years old? What's the shift? You said they've
so the shift is they've revised down their Bitcoin energy consumption estimates. So they've acknowledged, hey, we had a slightly older data set. We were overestimating. It's actually about 10 to 12 to 14% less than we thought.
Okay.
And the second part of the shift is they've also said, whilst we haven't updated our models for emissions, we can reasonably expect that when we factor in off-grid mining, methane mitigation, landfill gas methane mitigation, that it'll come down further. So they've publicly stated this.
And KPMG's report?
Was very positive. So they looked at all aspects of ESG, the environment, social, the governance, and they gave a tick in the box for all three.
Is ESG still relevant? Because it got a bit of a hammer in, especially like Elon Musk actually gave it a hammer in. And if he takes up an issue, he can usually have some impact.
Yeah, it's a tool. You can use a tool for good, for evil, for neutral. And it has been used for all three. The thing that I say to Bitcoiners is whether you think it's evil, whether you think it's neutral, whether you think it's good, it's a necessary rite of passage for Bitcoin, because like it or not, there's a whole lot of institutional capital tied up in ESG funds, 5 trillion in the US alone. It's going to be 11 trillion in the next 5 years, tens of trillions globally, that cannot invest and deploy into Bitcoin until there is a change in the ESG narrative.
Well, the ESG thing's interesting because a lot of Bitcoiners are very anti-ESG, and I totally understand why, because there's a lot of bullshit as well around it. I mean, some of the companies that are in the high in the ESG index, was it like ExxonMobil or somebody high in ESG? It's like, oh, come on, fuck off. But actually, I always felt like we could use ESG as a tool in that we know the energy credentials. Yeah. We certainly know the social and governance credentials. I felt like ESG is often focused on the E.
Yeah.
That's really where people have been. Yeah. But actually, Bitcoin ticks all three very well. I felt like that a long time.
Yeah, totally.
And so we can turn it against them.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go into methane.
Yeah.
Give me the science. Was it like 80 times more polluting than carbon, or?
It depends how you measure it. There's not a simple answer because methane breaks down in the atmosphere quicker.
Okay.
Yeah. So it has a life of between 9 to 12 years, some say 14 in the atmosphere.
Okay.
So it's hard to do an apples for apples comparison. While it's in the atmosphere, it's actually 200 times more warming,
Okay.
but it only stays in the atmosphere for a short time. So what people do is they say, well, let's measure the average global warming potential over 100 years. And they'll say, well, it's only 28 times worse than carbon dioxide. But then more recently, people have been saying, well, hang on, we haven't got 100 years to sort out this thing called climate change.
Yeah.
We are working to a much shorter time horizon of more like 20 years. So we should look at its potential global warming factor over 20 years. And over 20 years, it's between 80 to 86 times more warming than carbon dioxide. And that's the factor that I use.
Right. And so, but it does break down.
Does break down into carbon dioxide.
Okay. Into carbon dioxide. Okay. And that's just a natural process.
Yeah, there's these little particles in the atmosphere that will break it down. There's some issues there as well. Because of wildfires, they're not breaking it down as fast anymore, so it's actually staying in the air for longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
But carbon dioxide itself doesn't break down. It just gets recycled by plants.
It can break down over like 100-year plus period.
And to those people who say, no, having lots more carbon in the atmosphere is great because we get greening, what do you say to that?
Well, you get the wrong sort of greening. I don't have a garden shed anymore because the neighbour's tree fell on it. The reason the neighbour's tree fell on it, I know because I talked to the arborists, and they're the people close to the action. They're the ones who see the impact of climate change. And they said, I can tell you why that tree fell over. Number one, there was a flash flood, and we're having more extreme weather conditions. Number two, that tree there, because of extra carbon in the air, is 50% bigger than it was ever designed to be. And so its weight is huge, and it doesn't have the root structure to support it. That's why it fell over on your garden shed. So yes, it was bigger, but that's actually causing more problems. So it's not a good thing.
That feels like a very niche argument, a tree in your back garden.
That's an example of, so what I'm saying here is, and I looked at the research says that yes, there's more carbon, yes, it makes plants grow faster, but it doesn't actually increase their nutritional qualities. They don't have it's kind of like if you give a child growth hormones, yeah, they might grow taller, but there's going to be some consequences.
And so with methane, what are the primary sources of methane emissions? Where's it coming from? Obviously, I know cow farts. Well, it's burps, actually, isn't it?
Burps, yes.
Yeah, I know that's
three main
one.
sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, so fossil fuel industry, so oil, gas, and coal extraction. It's a byproduct of that because when you hit coal or gas, you also hit methane. And often that's just flared or sometimes it's just freely vented. Second is, yes, agriculture, what comes out of both ends of a cow or an animal. And then the third is landfills or waste generally. There's some other areas as well, rice fermentation, but they're the big three.
And are you saying they're about a third each?
Well, officially, landfills is a distant third.
Okay.
But unofficially, because of the NASA satellite footage, which said we underestimated our landfill emissions by a factor of between 2 and 3, unofficially, based on that, it's our number 2 source of methane. And if you look over the next 10 years, it's on course to become number 1 because it's growing at twice the rate of agriculture emissions.
And that's just basically in the landfill, all our crap breaking down and...
Yep.
Okay. And so...
Stuff that rots without air.
And so when you're considering climate change and what can be done, how much of an impact can we have by dealing with the issue of methane? And how much of the methane issue itself can be dealt with?
So the answer to the first question, it's absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. The good news about methane is because it stays in the atmosphere for a shorter period of time, if you stop it going into the atmosphere, you have an immediate impact on climate change. So whilst it hasn't been proven yet, I suspect that a lot of the reasons we're having these extreme weather events much more commonly than we thought, wasn't supposed to happen for another 20 years, is because methane levels have gone parabolic. So if we can do anything to reduce that, the impact's going to be felt immediately in terms of fewer extreme climate events.
Sorry, just to interrupt, these extreme climate events, is that provable that we've got more of them, or is the media just reporting on more of them?
If you look at what's happened, they've basically doubled since the 1970s. There has been analysis done on that.
Okay.
Yes. And that was about 5 years old. Since, if you update it to now, I don't know if a study's been done, but even 5 years ago, it's doubled since the 1970s.
It's not scientific, but it certainly feels like there's more events. It feels like when you put the news on, there's more big fires. There's, we had the big fires in Greece. We've had the big fire in Hawaii. The massive fires that seem to happen every year in Canada. We have massive flash flood events. I think Greece has just gone from fires to floods.
They have.
Yeah.
And where I grew up, that was flooded. That looks completely different to how it did. Bridges washed away, surf club deck washed away, people's houses, huge amounts of sand inundated them, roads cut off, roads destroyed. So I've seen it in my own neighborhood where I grew up in, and it just never used to happen, ever, in that volume.
And wasn't like a third of Pakistan underwater as well? Yeah. Which also sounds insane.
I would say, if anything, the media isn't reporting enough because you don't hear after the first couple of days. But yeah, a third of Pakistan underwater.
Yeah, which is insane, really.
Yeah,
it's a third of a whole country underwater. Okay, so those listening, Danny's brought up some data. Number of recorded natural disaster events, 1970 to 22.
Okay, so it's more than doubled.
Yeah, so in the 70s it was, what's that, about 80, 62, 71, 50, and then up to 467. So that's a 1,000% increase, and then it's kind of looks like the Bitcoin price from. It does, doesn't it? Looks like the Bitcoin chart, and so the trend, like when after it spiked in early 2000, it looks like there's like a downtrend.
Yeah, this one goes up to 2022. I'll be interested if we include this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these challenging charts, though, because you look at it and go, okay, right, I see it, but how much better is the reporting? Oh, look at this. Yeah. So we go down to the 1900s and you've got
like a Bitcoin
12.
chart, doesn't it?
It does look like the Bitcoin chart. If anyone's seeing this, you'll have to go on YouTube and see it. Danny, you'll stick that in the show notes, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much sort of weight you can put on these early years, though.
Yeah, well, but any of it, I wonder how good the reporting, because this could come to how good the reporting is. So I could trying to be as objective as possible. It might be that the reporting is getting better, but it certainly feels different. I know last summer in the UK, we've had an entirely wet summer this year. Although today in the UK is a record, or yesterday they had record high temperatures. But last summer was insanely hot. It felt like in the UK you never seem to get the heat that feels like you're in the Caribbean, and it did. And we were, my football team, we're going to play games where the pitches were just dry as fuck, and the grass was yellow. It was weird. It was stuff I'd not seen. I remember specifically one game we had to stand in the shade because it was so hot. That's the kind of thing I've experienced in Las Vegas and Barbados, not the UK. So anecdotally, I feel like this is right, but that's not scientific.
Well, I think that's what we have to go by, though, is to trust our own experiences. And a lot of the time, because we're in this post-truth world, that's what I come back to. And I say, well, yeah, you're right. That could be just because of bad reporting. But what does my experience tell me? My experience tells me that we're facing these things really often, and it never used to be as this often at all. Because I live in New Zealand, so I'm miles away from anywhere in the world, everyone I talk to is in a different country. And I'll be talking to people from Sydney and sometimes London, sometimes New York, and sometimes in Hawaii. I've got a client in Hawaii who was intimately involved in what just happened there, and it totally changed his life over that period of time. Some of his clients had been directly affected by that area which was burnt. And then I'm talking to one of our advisors in New York, and I'm saying, hey, how's things going? He said, oh, we just had flooding. And before that, we had an infestation of caterpillars, which had killed all the trees, and it's because it's warmer than it should be. And then after that, we had a whole lot of wasps that have just embedded themselves in my bathroom because it's warmer than it should be. And so, how we used to get together with someone, we talk about the weather maybe just to break the ice. We're still talking about the weather, but now it's talking about extreme weather. And that never used to happen. So I notice it. It's like, how many of these people? And in California, we start the conversation with talking about the latest wildfires there. That never used to happen. And I'm old enough now, because I'm in my 50s, to remember we never used to talk about this stuff when we got in conversations with other people in different parts of the world. So our common sense is telling us this is happening more frequently.
What do you think of net zero policies? Are they misguided? Is it just a branding exercise? Is it focusing attention and resources in the wrong area?
I think you've got to have a target, and you've got to have an aspirational target. People respond well to goals. Without a ship without a rudder cannot leave the harbor. So you've got to have these targets. So I don't have an issue with setting a target and having a vision. I have some different perspectives on how you might achieve that vision, and some of the other things that I think have been neglected from the picture, though.
Right. And look, lots of different things can be done everywhere. You yourself are focused on the methane issue.
We just said, look, out of all the things that I could do in the world, what's one thing I can make a difference to? And it was methane emissions.
Okay. So where do you start with that?
Well, you start with looking at the three different sources and you think, okay, which is the one that's the easiest to address using technology? And that was clearly going to be landfills.
How many landfills are there globally?
In terms of number, I don't know. Somewhere between a lot and a whole lot.
Sometimes I wonder, like, are we going to run out?
Put it this way: there's enough landfill gas emissions, at least, to power the Bitcoin network 1.5 times over.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's just with the stuff that is accessible. That's not even including the stuff that's inaccessible or not logistically possible.
Yeah. So that comes to a whole other. I'll come back to that whole other question though about is the network big enough to support the number of ASICs that we need to go out and burn that off? And I'm not sure. I don't know. I kind of like try and start doing weird math in my head. Like we're here at Iris Energy using their office, and they just reported this month that they've mined Bitcoin at $58,000 a Bitcoin. Because they had energy, they had minus 8 cents energy costs because they are working with the Texas grid and they're buying their energy and selling it back.
Yeah.
And so when you can do that, when you can mine at negative energy prices, you expand the scope of how big the Bitcoin network can be.
Yeah.
And so if energy or mining companies can go onto landfill sites and be paid to burn off the methane rather than buying the methane, you can see a scenario where you can expand the Bitcoin network.
It makes economic sense.
Yeah.
How we're doing it is you can get carbon credits on it.
Right.
So
just a second, did you find out how many landfill sites there are globally?
No, I didn't find out but I saw, here you go, I'll pull it up.
Landfills, the world release a lot of methane. Okay.
I wonder if anyone can get the number of landfills globally. It might be too hard.
About 570 million tons of greenhouse gas emitted every year from both industrial and natural processes. The concentration of methane in the atmosphere has been increasing at a record pace because we're putting more in faster than it's breaking down.
Correct. And it's breaking down slower.
It's breaking down slower. A landfill in Mumbai, for example, was putting out about 9.8 tons of methane per hour. Or 80,000 tons. I always find gas measured in weight really odd.
Yeah.
Because I can't conceptualize it.
How do you put it on the scales? It doesn't weigh anything.
Yeah, it's weird because
I guess you compress it. I don't know how they do the measurement.
But it's such a weird measurement.
Yeah.
Because it's a gas. I'm assuming a ton of methane. It's a fuck ton of methane.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge amount.
Yeah, because it's
massive.
gas.
It's massive.
Yeah. Whereas
massive
like
amounts.
if you said it was like a ton of bottles of water, I'll be like, okay, that's maybe like this table's worth, stacked 10 high.
Yeah.
I can conceptualize that. I can't.
This is interesting. Read that, Pete.
Okay, landfill waste responsible for about 11% of global methane emissions is expected to increase by 70% by 2050 as global populations continue to climb. Have you got that? You got the chart of population growth? We're over 8 billion now, right? Okay, so it's a problem that exists, and it's a problem that's trajectory? Is that a word? It's getting worse.
It's on a bad trajectory. Yeah.
Buenos Aires landfill site emitted some 250,000 annual tons of methane. It feels a lot.
Yeah. So this is exactly what we want to stop. And it can be stopped because a lot of these landfills are freely venting them into the atmosphere right now. So they don't even have, in many cases, they're not even flaring them. So it's just going directly into the atmosphere. So to give you an idea, if you generate 1 megawatt of power from vented landfills, you're offsetting 1,200 tons of methane. And of course, it's 84 times as warming. That's over 120,000 tons of what they call carbon dioxide equivalents. That's massive. And our goal is we're setting up this fund so we can do 32 megawatts of power generation on landfills. And if you do the math on that, that's equivalent to 4 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents.
What percentage of emissions is that, though, on that?
Well, to give you an idea, Bitcoin's network emissions right now, as based on my own research, is 35 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Of course, it doesn't have any direct emissions.
It's about
fully
10%.
So it's about 10%,
Yeah,
just over 10%.
just over 10%.
Yeah.
Are you doing this yourself? Or are we working with Vespa?
So we're Vespine is an example
Vespine,
of one of
sorry,
the
yeah.
companies that we could
Vespa.
give infrastructure funding to.
That's the motorbike.
Yeah, not
chicken chaser.
Vespine Energy. Yeah,
Yeah.
They're great guys.
Yeah.
And they're doing amazing stuff. So they're an example of the sort of project we could give infrastructure financing to.
Is there any live actual projects where Bitcoin ASICs are on a landfill site?
Two.
So it's two.
Two companies. Yeah. So 3 sites, 2 companies. So Nodal Power and Vespine are doing it.
Where are they doing it? Where are the sites?
Marathon County is where Vespine is doing it. There's one in Utah, which Nodal Power is doing it, and they've got a second site. I can't remember offhand. So the total of 6.4 megawatts currently coming from landfills. So it's small.
Are these tests? Are they testing at the moment? Or would you say
No, they're
these
proper
are
sites.
proper sites?
Yeah, that's quite a lot of megawatts.
Okay, so it exists, it's done.
Yeah, it's been done.
So their job is scale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When Danny brought up that article just then, I'm not sure what landfill was that. Was that a photo of the Mumbai?
I think so.
That
Yeah.
feels like it's an open landfill. And my expectation is that ideally you want it somehow closed.
Correct.
So how
Yeah.
do these sites work in terms of construction?
So the way landfills work is, for me, it's fascinating. So for health and safety reasons in the West, you will always have these perforated vertical well shafts that go into the landfill itself. The reason for that is you can't have methane buildup, because if you get methane buildup, it causes subsidence, and that's not a good thing if you're driving heavy machinery over the top of it.
Can it also cause explosions?
Can also cause explosions, which is the second reason it's a bad
Yeah.
thing. Correct. So you have these well shafts so to mitigate that human health and safety issue. But it's like, right, it's out of landfill, it's in the air, right, job done. So that's as far as it's gone. So our job is to find those landfills that already have those vertical well shafts in place and say, okay, rather than going into the air, we're going to put a wellhead on top. We're going to put some piping in place. We're going to purify that gas and compress it, get rid of the moisture, put it into some generators, and use those generators to create electricity, which does Bitcoin mining on site.
My therefore expectation is the low-hanging fruit is going to be the landfill sites in developed nations versus
Correct.
developing nations, because I expect more developing nations are just holes in the ground, open pits of,
You got it?
yeah.
You got it. So that's a low-hanging fruit for us, with one exception, and that is that there is the possibility of doing public-private partnership, where we go to nation states, and we're actually looking at something like this at the moment in Latin America, which is a possibility, where some of these nation states, they recognize the methane problem. They want to get rid of it. But their problem is they're not going to invest in ASICs, but they could invest in the infrastructure to collect that gas, so that we could do deals quite conceivably, and this is something we're talking about right now, where the government basically say, okay, we'll give you the loan to a special purpose venture that we set up, and we'll do it at over 20 years at US Treasury rates, and we will pay for the infrastructure to turn basically an open dump into a landfill. You guys come in and you provide the infrastructure financing for the generators, for the gas, the other part of the gas capture and collection to the generator, and of course the ASICs.
How complicated is this infrastructure? If you had a site, there's a interestingly, on the edge of Bedford where I live, when you drive up to the motorway, there used to be a huge landfill. It's full. You know, they put as much crap in the ground as they could. It's all been covered now. It's all grass. But as you drive past, you see these kind of black lines. They're like tubes that go across, and then you see the tubes that come out of the ground. So, like in my head, I know what's going on there. I don't know if it's being burnt off. It might be, but
If you don't see a flame, it's not been burned.
yeah,
So-
I don't know, but
Yeah.
I don't know what the legal requirement is in the UK. Whether you can just put it out into the atmosphere.
Legally in Europe, you're required to do something with it. You have to either burn it or use it for power generation, or capture that gas and use the gas.
But if you have a site
Yeah.
like that, how much infrastructure needs to be built to put a Bitcoin mining operation there? What do you need to do?
The infrastructure cost of the gas collection is only 1/4 of the infrastructure cost of the Bitcoin mining rigs.
So it's the ASICs is the
The ASICs is the expensive bit.
okay.
Yeah.
And does it tend to be like, is this commoditized? Is it like I need a container unit that has A, B, and C in it?
Yeah, so there's 3 parts to the equation. So you have the gas collection, so that takes your existing well shaft, purifies the gas, takes out the moisture, compresses it. That's the first part. That costs about 1/4 of the ASICs. Then you have the generators. So the generators will cost roughly equivalent to the ASICs, a little bit less. So 1 megawatt generator will cost about $1 million US. And then you have the ASICs, and they're going to cost. So say you're doing 4 megawatts on a landfill. You might pay just over $1 million for your gas collection. You're going to pay around $4 million for your generators, and you're going to pay about another $5 million, depending on the cost of ASICs at the time, for your hash huts.
Hold on, what was the total you got? Did you get to what, 8 million there?
About 9 million.
About 9 million for a site.
Yeah.
And in terms of the payback, what's the kind of estimated period?
Yeah, so we don't finance the generators. Someone else finances them because there's already good financing arrangements in place for generators. So we finance the gas capture collection plus the ASICs. So that's a 6 million. And that gets a return on investment in 3.5 years.
Okay, so it's there's a long cycle to that.
Yeah.
And price volatility will impact. You could see the price go up and that reduces the time, but also you can see the price drop and increase
we're
the time.
basing it on bear case scenarios for Bitcoin.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're building this entire thing based on the worst possible assumptions about the price of carbon and about the price of Bitcoin.
And what, I know it depends on the site, but what would you expect to pay for the gas? Or what's the kilowatt hour you're paying?
1 cent per kilowatt hour.
1 cent. So that's
roughly.
low.
Yeah, very low.
Are there scenarios where people would pay you or whoever has put it there to burn it off?
Potentially, if they were regulated and they had to flare it otherwise, that's possible. We prefer to pay for it, though, and collect the carbon credits. That actually works out better.
Okay, talk to me about the carbon credits.
Yeah, so the carbon credits is amazing because it's an example of someone, we were talking before about renewable policy. It's a rare example of renewable policy instituted by governments internationally actually working. So it's actually doing exactly what it should do. These propositions we're looking at would be very marginal if it weren't for the carbon credits. But because of the carbon credits, it actually makes them profitable. So that's exactly what carbon credits were designed to do. They were designed to do infrastructure development that was good for the environment, that wouldn't make economic sense unless there was an additional incentive to do it.
It's a bit like the Elon Musk credits for buying a Tesla. That made economic sense for Tesla.
That made economic sense for Tesla, correct.
But so we are relying on, this isn't pure free market, we are relying on state support.
Well, it's international support. Yeah, Paris Accord, Paris Climate Accord.
By the way, do you know the whole story with Vespine where they went to that first site? We've got Nick Barty in the room, by the way, anyone listening. I don't know if you heard this, but the Vespine guy told us that they went to the site and he explained to them that, you know, what we want to do. You know the story. So, do you know the story? So they went to the site and he explained to them what they want to do. And they said, we want to put these machines here and we will take the methane, we'll burn it and we'll generate Bitcoin. And apparently the guy said, yeah, that sounds really cool and interesting, but how do you know there's Bitcoin in there? Killed me, man.
We don't get into a whole lot talking to landfill owners about Bitcoin and about sound money. We just explain it like there's some data centers on site that need a lot of power.
Well, that's the way to do it. I mean, it was exactly, I was chatting to Will here. Was it Will I was chatting to at Iris? There's a lot of curtailment of wind power in the UK. And I mean, we're talking tens of millions. I don't even know over what periods, but it's huge. Yeah. And I know if you went to those people and said, hey, by the way, you don't have to, I'll buy that from you and I'll buy it at this price. They'll go, yeah, great, you'll sell it. And yeah, if they said, what are you going to do? I'm going to just put like a data center there. But yeah, cool. What's in the data center? Bitcoin miners? But no, we're not doing this. And there's like this aversion to working with them. Here you go. Unresolved grid bottlenecks risk adding £200 to annual household bills. Did you say, hold on, what's that 3 pound cost? It's got the amount that's being curtailed. It's a lot. It's fuck tons.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this is happening the world over. It's the same story, which is curtailed energy, stranded energy. No one else can use it. Bitcoin miners can use it.
So on these landfills, it sounds great, but like realistically, scaling this globally, what kind of investments? What kind of like, are we talking billions that would be required?
Well, put it this way. To do 280 megawatts, which would be enough to fully offset the entire Bitcoin network's carbon emissions as they stand today, you'd be looking at $400 million, which is not a lot of money in the grander scheme of things. There's not an industry in the world I know that for $400 million can offset 35 million tons of carbon emissions.
But the industry itself is not a company. It's a group of individuals and individual incentives. You know, if this was British Airways and they knew that they could spend this to offset theirs, they might. But there's no centralized incentive to do this. You were about to say something.
I was only going to say burning methane is producing carbon. So why does it why does it reduce the carbon emitted?
Ah, yes. Because the methane is 84 times more warming than carbon dioxide. So if you have a gas, basically it's using pollution as a fuel source. It's beautiful. So it takes things that would have gone into the air, would have caused climate havoc in the form of methane, and it stops it going into the air, instead diverts it into a generator. There is a byproduct of carbon dioxide. However, because it's landfills, that carbon dioxide would have been created anyway as part of a natural biogenic process. So what you're doing, it's a horrible analogy, but you're flattening the curve. It's like there would have been this huge peak.
We've heard this term
and
before.
You're going, squash. Like I say, horrible term, but it describes it pretty well. You're flattening the curve where you don't get that massive methane build up in the meantime, and no one needs a vaccine.
But hold on. So, but if you're doing this in developed countries, there's probably already, I don't know who the people are in the UK. Who's it in the US? The EPA?
EPA in the US.
Yeah, I don't know who's in the UK, but they already have legislation that the methane has either to be captured or burnt off.
So we're not going to Europe for that reason.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there's no net difference if you're going to places that already has legislation.
There is a net difference even then. It's different to what we're doing, but there's still a net difference because even if they're flaring it, that's only destroying around 91% of the methane. And you might think, 9% is near enough. But remember, that's 84 times more warming than carbon dioxide, so 9% of methane is still a lot. And those Bitcoin miners can come in and they can mitigate that long tail, that final 9%.
Yeah, but that doesn't feel game-changing. Like,
for us, that's not what we want to do.
Yeah.
We want to go to the places which are 100% venting right now, and we want to go there.
Yeah, Buenos Aires, Mumbai.
Exactly.
And so would part of that be, as we've seen, these are kind of like open landfills where would part of the project potentially being to bring their top layer infrastructure to cover these landfills, to have the pipe, like to build the infrastructure that you have in the Europe?
How we see it is a great question. We may go that way earlier. How we see it in our minds is, and plans can change, is that we'll do the low-hanging fruit to start with. We'll go to the places which are venting, but they have the infrastructure in place. They have those perforated vertical wells. So we're not having to put that base level infrastructure in. So that's where we go to start with. So little places like developed nations in South America. There's plenty of landfills there that fit that brief.
Okay.
That's enough for our first fund. Fund 2, however, we absolutely want to be going to these places like Mumbai, these places like, there's some places in Central America, which are being described as hell on earth, where you just have these huge, vast swathes of waste. Actually, Southeast Asia as well, massive problems. Wherever you have a growing middle class, you have a growing landfill issue or an open dump issue. There are people in Central America right now, like about 3,000 people on one particular island, and this is an island with a population of 11 million people, who all they do and how they earn their livelihood is looking through the waste of civilization for things they can resell.
Yeah.
They earn
Scavenging.
Scavenging. They earn $3 to $4 a day. 2,000, 3,000 people. They're on the landfill all day. Methane is not just causing climate havoc, it also causes massive respiratory illnesses. They all have respiratory illnesses. They get syringed, they get infections. It's horrible. One of the things we want to be doing down the track is working with government to say, let's give these people meaningful work, let's give them a living wage, let's give them the proper equipment and tools to do their job, let's give them something that has dignity, such as sorting the rubbish rather than scavenging, and let's deal with this landfill issue, because when you're preventing the methane from escaping, it's not just good for the climate, it's also good for the local population, because they won't have these respiratory illnesses anymore. Let's tidy up the entire space. So Bitcoin can become a catalyst where you can create massive benefits to a community, to the locality, not just to climate change, which seems very abstract to people. So even if you're climate change denier, you can point to and say, we've cleaned up this community. These people don't have respiratory illnesses anymore.
What's the size of the first fund, can you say?
It's a $50 million fund.
And is it closed?
No, we're still
You're actively
in the process.
raising.
We're actively raising.
And then if that was successful, you have a great test case to go out and raise 250 million. And
Well, we
so
do.
on.
The next one would be 350.
350.
Because that's the target. Because if we do, that,
You want to do the 400.
We want to do the 400 because that's a wonderful story about offsetting the Bitcoin network's carbon emissions.
But if you go further than that,
Yeah.
the Bitcoin network could be net negative.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's a massive win for everyone
Massive
in
win.
Bitcoin.
Massive win.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's
Look,
utterly fascinating.
Look, it's like, you have a goal to take Bedford to the Premier League. We have a goal too, and it's a crazy, big, hairy, audacious goal, and it's going to take multiple years. But just like you can see in your mind, other people call you crazy, right? But you can see,
you see the path.
you can see the path. We can see the path. In my mind, there is an absolute path towards this. Now, will it look like that in reality? No, it'll deviate. It'll be different. But I can absolutely see a clear path where this is possible.
And are you doing the work, or are you just providing the capital for other people to do this?
We don't do the mining ourselves.
Okay.
So our job is to provide the capital. Having said that, that is easier said than done because we've had to learn 4 pretty niche areas. We've had to learn about Bitcoin mining economics, landfill gas power generation, carbon credits, and infrastructure financing. So that's been a massive learning curve. And that's why it's taken so long even to be in a position to launch the fund, because we had to make sure it made sense to the wholesale investors and that we had a critical mass of Bitcoin miners and landfills as well. But now we're in a position, it's like we're the marriage celebrants. That's what we want to be. It's like the landfill owners want to do this. They really want to do it because they can earn money from it.
Mm-hmm.
The Bitcoin miners want to do it because they can get cheap
power.
electricity. And not only that, but they get diversified revenue because they're getting not only revenue from Bitcoin, but also from the carbon credits.
And the government want people...
And the government want it done. So everyone wins. No one loses.
Well, it's a perfect set of incentives lining up.
It's a perfect set of incentives lining
Yeah.
up. So everyone wins. But in the middle, hasn't been the marriage celebrant to give the financing to the Bitcoin mining companies to be able to do this. So that was a role we wanted to play.
We were out for dinner last night, me and Danny, with a bunch of people, and there's a couple of people listened to the show, and one of the guys said to me, he said, "What's your biggest wow moment since you've been doing this podcast?" And I had to sit and think about it for a while, and I said, "Do you know what it is? It sounds a bit, nerdy, but it's the unknown unknowns of Bitcoin are the most amazing thing."
Yeah.
I was trying to explain it. I was trying to say, at some point, hundreds of millions of years ago, billions of years ago, a spark in the bottom of the ocean created cellular life, which replicated. And from that, we now have 4 humans in this room having a conversation. We're going to go out and eat food later that's grown by farmers. And this, from this one cell, you've got this entire organism that all these different organisms that we have. And Bitcoin itself is like, the launch of the network, the original protocol, the version, whatever 1 or 0.1 protocol, is essentially like that style of cellular life, but it's taken on this life of its own. I think there is no way, I just do not believe Satoshi, when he created Bitcoin, could imagine, 13 years down the line, there would be these kind of data centers with these ASICs that sit on top of landfill sites burning methane. And listen, I know how, tweeted out early on about, he's interested to see what I can't remember the actual tweet, but what Bitcoin can do for climate change or reducing the effects of climate change. At the same time, I think this unknown that's come out of Bitcoin miners working with grids to stabilize them, like Iris is doing here in Texas, that you are building these or working to fund these operation at landfill sites to mitigate methane. To me, that's the wow. And I'm like, what's the next unknown we're going to get out of Bitcoin? Because it is this weird organism which is just finding its own path. You can't really stop Bitcoin. If you try and get in the way or change it, it just runs you over. It's just becoming this kind of whole life of its own. To me, it wows me so much.
It's absolutely phenomenal. Some people say, do you think Satoshi knew that? And I was like, no, of course not. It's like, did the original creators of the internet know how we'd be using it today? Of course not.
No.
But something about the intention from how it was created has made that possible, because I believe Satoshi created it as it was an act of service to humanity. And it came out of observing that what we were doing wasn't working. He or she, they wanted to create a solution.
Incentives around money.
Yeah. And because of that, so much good has come of it in ways that we could never have anticipated.
Yeah, fascinating.
And it's a totally accidental benefit of Bitcoin. Totally accidental.
So what are your biggest challenges with this? Is it just raising capital?
Well, that's always part of the equation. That's a one-time activity. I think the biggest challenge will really be, as you say, it's just about continuing to scale and continuing to go, okay, I can see very clearly how we can do the first fund and how we can target the landfills, which are the low-hanging fruit. The next big challenge will be, okay, what about exactly what you're saying? What about these open dumps? How do we deal with them? If we're going to do this at scale, we can't just go for the low-hanging fruit in developed countries. We've got to go to undeveloped countries. That's going to be the game changer. How do we do that? How do we do landfills that are not economically viable? Logistically possible, but not economically viable, and still give a return to wholesale investors? Those are the big challenges. Do we do it because we find out a way where the carbon credits can be worth more than they are currently? Do we have a new carbon credit methodology which accepts the 84 times multiplier? These are the questions we ask ourselves. Do we do it through negotiating at nation-state level and getting co-sponsorship of these projects? So these are the things that we're still working through. So in my mind, I'm already going to Fund 2 and Fund 3 and thinking, if we really want to mitigate emissions at scale and reduce half the world's landfill emissions, that's my goal, those are the big challenges, because that's not easy and that doesn't make economic sense today. So those are the solutions we've got to find.
Yeah, so Bitcoin mining is potentially going to play a massive role in landfill methane emission, potentially a massive role globally on grid stabilization.
Yeah.
But an important factor of driving the ability to have this happen is the Bitcoin price.
Mm-hmm.
If for whatever reason, a number of these sites were built and the Bitcoin price, for whatever reason, crashed down to 12,000, it might make some of these projects suddenly unviable. And then suddenly you're in a situation it's like, well, we've sold this solution, we've built out these operations. What do we now have to close them? There is always that risk factor.
Yeah, there's a risk factor, and we're very aware of that. So our approach has always been, we have a last man standing approach, which is, in the worst, we look at these black hat scenarios all the time. We say, what's our black hat scenario? Bitcoin goes to 12,000, if it goes to 6,000, if it goes to zero, if it doesn't exist anymore. What are our other strategies? And we look through, because we have a fiduciary duty to answer those questions. And so we have to evaluate non-Bitcoin off-takers of that power, such as high-performance computing, artificial intelligence data centers, charging EV trucks, etc.
Right.
All these scenarios, we actually have to, which is quite cool, because then when people criticize us and saying, well, why are you going to Bitcoin? There's other uses. We said, look, we've looked at the alternatives. This is the one that stacks up economically the best by far. We're in a position, because of that cheap price of electricity, where the people who are doing this form of Bitcoin mining, they'll be one of the most resilient on the network. Plus the fact that they're also getting, just like RSR and other people, they've been smart, they've got that ancillary revenue source. So the future I see for mining, the ones who will be doing well, the ones who bought their capital at the right time, the ones who've sourced really cheap multi-year and sometimes decade-long power purchase agreements, and the people who have another income source as well as Bitcoin mining. So that even if Bitcoin mining goes down, you can still sell demand response, or you can still earn carbon credits, or you can earn RECs, or you can do heat recycling or something else as well as Bitcoin. That's when you get that resilience there. And so that's been absolutely key to our fund thesis.
That price factor, I guess, works in the other way, though, because say BlackRock suddenly today announced ETF approved and the Bitcoin price goes up to 200,000. Suddenly your job of raising capital and deploying capital for these sites becomes super easy?
It becomes easier.
Well, easier because the economics are better.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing what the price of Bitcoin does to
definitely.
the network.
Oh, look, it really does. I suspected this was going to happen sooner than it had, because remember, $500 million was given to Crusoe Energy to do this in 2021. But that was the last time there was a deployment of that size.
How much?
$500 million.
$500 million? Hold
$500
on,
million.
that's more than you need.
That was $500 million was given to Crusoe to do flare gas mitigation in the oil and gas industry. So that's a serious amount of money. Now, I can say, well, if we had $500 million, we could offset the entire Bitcoin's network. So they've got a different fund thesis to what we do. But yeah, that's more than we need. So the money has been available, but that was available in the bull run.
Offsetting the Bitcoin network is a good goal and it's a great story, but you also want to reduce the impact of climate change. So how big can this be? You know,
Yeah. Well, we don't want to stop with
400 million.
No, we don't want to stop there. Look, my goal, my equivalent of Premier League, it's offsetting 2% of global emissions.
2% of global emissions of
Not
all
just
emissions?
all emissions.
All emissions.
All emissions. Yeah.
But how much of a difference does 2% really make?
Not enough.
Because we probably grow by 2% a year.
Nowhere near enough. Even at our wildest, most crazy dream, we can only get to 2%. However, this is what gives me hope. If we have another 49 people who are thinking the same way we are, well, we've offset global emissions. So we're going to do our part. It's nowhere near enough. It's not a drop in the ocean. It's probably more like a drop in a shot glass, but we'll do our part.
How much PR has there been for these ideas around landfill sites? Because it feels like an incredible story just to go out to the press.
Story. Yeah, nowhere near enough.
Yeah.
Nowhere near enough.
Hmm.
I think there's a huge opportunity there. And landfills, look, for me, they're such fascinating areas because you're turning
shit.
You're turning
crap.
You're turning trash into digital gold.
Well, that was the same when I went out and made my documentary around Texas, and I went to this guy's house where he was heating his pool with ASIC miners. And I just said to her, I said, isn't this amazing?
It's absolutely incredible.
Like, via a decentralized global network, you're able to put these little machines here and heat your pool whilst generating hard currency.
It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is that for, I would say, half of the world's landfills right now, Bitcoin mining is the thing that makes most sense. That's amazing. So in other words, it wouldn't be happening, and this is the reason it hasn't happened, is because you haven't had anyone who is incentivized enough to want to go and pay all that capex to chase that cheap electricity. Just the equation doesn't make sense because of the infrastructure costs. But for Bitcoin mining, if 80% of your bill is electricity, it absolutely makes economic sense. So it's just this crazy quirk of the business model of Bitcoin mining means suddenly doing something really good for the world makes economic sense.
Well, I love it, man. Honestly, when we have Vespine on afterwards, I was like, I love this. It's just so wild. And it's one of those things, it's like a really neat thing to take to your friends and explain to them when they talk about Bitcoin and they explain the things they've read in the mainstream press, which is utter bullshit. You can say, listen to this story.
Well, it's a game changer. It's the one thing that no opponent of Bitcoin has been able to have a comeback for yet.
Yeah. What could you? What can you honestly say?
On the grid side, look, grids are confusing places. You need to understand, and there's so much opportunity for FUD.
Yeah.
As we've seen from the New York Times. But one of the reasons I went to the landfills was not just that I felt that can make a massive difference, but also the story is so much simpler.
Yeah.
The story's hard on the grid. I mean, I had to listen to Sean Connell's interview with you 3 times to really get it because he's just such a wealth of information. But a lot of it was going over my head because I didn't understand grids. A lot of people aren't going to do that. They're not going to listen 3 times. No. But landfills, it's a simple equation. We take pollution, we stop it going to the air, we send it to a generator.
And make Bitcoin.
Find
Bitcoin.
There's one chart that I did, and Willie and I did this together, where we got 4 things in parallel. One of the stories that the antagonists of Bitcoin use against Bitcoin is they say...
Hold on, do we have the chart?
I'll pull it up.
Let's pull the chart
So
up.
it's got emissions, it's got hash rate, it's got the global user growth of Bitcoin, and it's got emissions. Did I say emissions?
You said emissions.
I said emissions. So it's got emissions, hash price, price of Bitcoin, and user growth. Those 4 things all over a 4-year hodl period.
And do they all align? Are they all driving each other?
Everyone's going up except emissions.
Okay.
And that's really critically important because what that's saying is that emissions is no longer tethered to Bitcoin price rise, hash rate growth, or user growth on the network. And that's been a huge concern. People said, well, we don't know if we double the price of Bitcoin or we triple it, we 10x it, it's going to mean more emissions. And we're saying the data doesn't say that. The data says emissions has remained constant over the last 4 years.
Is this the chart?
That's the one.
Well, actually, it looks like there's a downtrend there on emissions.
Subtly down, but I've called it neutral because that could shoot up and suddenly it's not down anymore.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of volatile, but overall it's pretty neutral.
But that's a 9.4% drop in emissions against a 475% increase in hash rate. Is any of that to do with the efficiency of the machines?
Yes, it's partly efficiency of the machines, and it's partly because the sources of electricity are much more sustainable than they were 4 years ago.
And is that partly because of the China ban, people moving to Texas?
China ban, people moving out of Kazakhstan, people moving onto the ERCOT grid, and also the massive rise of off-grid Bitcoin mining. So most off-grid mining, where you're doing direct power purchase agreements, you're, of course, chasing the cheapest energy, and in most cases, that's going to be renewable.
But is that also not reported then, though?
Cambridge don't report on that yet.
So how do we know that that's accurate on the emission data on the off-grid stuff? Because
I spent the last 8 months chasing down every single renewable and non-renewable off-grid Bitcoin miner I could and charting them and open sourcing that so even I could query the data.
Got you.
Yeah.
The rise in hash rate since 2021 is insane.
Yeah. So this is important because one of the things that the White House OSTP report said is we need evidence that as you grow the Bitcoin network, you can do it in such a way that does not grow carbon emissions.
Yeah.
There's your evidence.
But hopefully it reduces it.
And it can actually reduce it.
Yeah.
If you're doing, so this is largely without methane mitigation. This is just the impact of flared gas emission, which is only 6% of the total emissions. But if you put landfill gas in there, that's going to drive emissions down significantly.
It's so cool, man.
Yeah.
Daniel, great work. Well, okay. People want to find out more information. Where should they go?
So the social media platform formerly known as Twitter.
X.com.
At dsbatten. And also ch4capital.com.
All right. Well, listen, good luck with this. It's very cool.
you.
Very cool. I'll be interested to track it, follow what you're doing. Yeah, keep us updated. And we've waited a long time to do this show, try and get together. We might from next year, we might loosen our remote show policy for reasons of our own. So
fantastic.
Yeah, just keep us updated. There's I guess it would be good to follow up once a bunch of capital is deployed in these sites. Actually, I want to go to a site.
Oh, look, landfills are amazing.
Hold on, which is the one in California?
The big landfill in California?
Yeah, the one where the Vespine have got. Is it in California?
Oh, no, they're in Marathon County.
What's that?
Knowledge of US geography isn't that great.
It's Marathon County. Nick, you're the American in the room.
Wisconsin.
Thank you.
I have no plans to go to Wisconsin. Okay. But I would like to go to one of these sites at some point.
They're incredible.
Yeah.
They're absolutely amazing.
Well, look, just keep us updated and congratulations. It's incredible and good luck.
Thank you.